Hi, everyone. Welcome to Riot's virtual Lunch and Learn series. My name is Caroline Griffin. I am Riot's Director of Operations, and I'm very thankful to have you with us today. Today, we have Stuart Beck from Nemko talking about electrical safety regulatory framework for the US and Canada. Before Stuart gets started, I just have a couple of quick reminders for everyone. One, if you could please keep yourself muted throughout the presentation, there will be an opportunity for you to ask questions at the end. The second reminder that I have for you guys is that this is being recorded. It will be posted to Riot's YouTube channel and then shared broadly to the meetup page in which you registered for this event. And then the third reminder I have for you guys is if you have any questions throughout the event, please do put those in the chat box, and Stuart and I will make sure that all of your questions get answered at the end of his presentation. Without further ado, I know you guys are here to see Stuart, so I'll hand it over to him, and thank you for being here.
Thank you very much, Caroline. Appreciate that. Welcome, everybody. Appreciate the opportunity to speak to you for the next kind of 45 minutes or so. We'll give an introduction to the world of electrical safety regulations, some of the pitfalls, some of the things that we can help you with as you bring your products through from design phase up to the ultimate goal, which is to get them out into the market. So that's what we're about. Nemko is a testing certification organization. We're here to help manufacturers. My position, I'm responsible for Nemko's product certification schemes globally. So part of that is our certification body for the United States and Canada. So we move into the content for this particular presentation. There are a few sections that we'll talk about. First of all, who are the players? So there are a number of stakeholders in the whole process. I'll give you an introduction to those. What kind of position they play, and how we can basically cooperate between them. We'll talk a bit about standards. Everything we do is standards related, so it's important that we understand who publishes them, the types of standards that we're going to use, versions. It's all very critical to the whole process, so we'll go into that a little bit as well. Now, we'll talk about certification. Well, it's important to know actually what it is. So I will actually make a very distinct description of what certification is, just so everybody's on the same page. Now, the most important part for those that who have not been through this before is to understand a little bit about the process. Take it from the start right to the end. I'll give you some good guidance tips, and hopefully that will help you as you try and bring your products to fruition, bring them out to the market. Now, electrical safety is one aspect of regulatory compliance. What we also have some other considerations, maybe outside of the electrical safety field. So I'll give some pointers to kind of guide you in kind of thinking about other particular regulations that may be applicable, so that we're not kind of left hanging at the end saying, have we covered everything? So there are quite a lot to consider in that, and we're here to basically guide. So let's move on. What is an NRTL? What is OSHA? These are very important kind of acronyms in the electrical safety world, especially, well, in the US especially. We have other ones in Canada. But if we look specifically at OSHA first, so the Occupational Safety Health Administration, they are a federal agency, as I'm sure many of you are aware, and they are mandated to prevent accidents in the workplace, secure the safety of the American workers. And they can do this in a number of different ways. One of them is to look at product safety as an approvals kind of mechanism where we can certify products against recognized standards, and then they mandate that those products have to be certified before they can go into a workplace. This helps to assure safety. Now, one of the key things here is that it is only for the workplace. Now, what happens outside of the workplace? Well, we have other jurisdictions as well, especially in the United States, where we have many jurisdictions, federal, that's OSHA, but we also have state level, we have municipal levels as well, and counties. So there are thousands of authorities having jurisdiction. We're going to focus on the federal level, which really many of the jurisdictions point to. And with this, the presentation really covers most of what you will need to know. So north of the border, very similar type of activity where there is third-party certification required. It's not regulated at the federal level, unlike in the US. It's actually at the provincial and territorial, and we also have some municipal government regulations as well. The common position between all of them, though, is that they do require accreditation, and that accreditation has to be with the Standards Council of Canada. Independent organization, even though they're a crown corporation, but they are not government. So that gives the impartiality that the regulators are always looking for when it comes to recognizing a certification body's ability to certify products in an independent, impartial fashion. Now, I mentioned that this is not a federal program. It's also not specific to a particular workplace or place of residence. It's basically everything. So the local jurisdictions actually regulate electrical safety pretty much for everywhere and pretty much every electrical product. The US, workplace. So there are some distinct differences. So with the US rules, from OSHA, and obviously federal agency, many people often ask, how do we know that we have to get a product certified? Where does it say that? Within the rules, and of course, legislation is very often difficult to read. So I give a couple of pointers just to where it is in case people ask. But OSHA's rules under the Department of Labor, the 29 CFR 1910, they give some very, very key definitions that requiring electrical equipment to be listed, for example. There are also references to equipment having to be accepted. These are very, very key terms. And when we mean listed, well, that means basically certified. Accepted means accepted by the authority having jurisdiction. And that means that OSHA are okay in allowing this product to be in the workplace just by having been certified by an NRTL. Now, we also have what we call the National Electrical Code. So in its proper term, the NFPA 70, that's the name of the document. There is a clause in there, Article 110-2, which actually makes reference to equipment needing to be approved. And also within that code, they say authorities having jurisdiction would accept that equipment that was approved. So as you tie all of these terms together in definitions, we get to the point that basically says equipment needs to be approved, ready for installation. There are no rules that say you can't sell unapproved equipment, in the US anyway. Canada, it's a different issue, but within the US, you can sell it. However, retailers like Amazon, and they also have rules that if you try to sell product on their platform, they would require approvals as well. So we do have different types of industry regulation as well. But if you look at purely at governmental, then the OSHA rules are there. Local jurisdictions would have theirs too. An example of a local jurisdiction that has made rules, I give one here, City of Chicago. So they have enacted the City of Chicago Building Code. And within it, as you can see on screen, what they've done is they've actually mandated adoption of the National Electrical Code, the NFPA 70. And what they've also done is that they've added a specific reference to any product being certified by an NRTL is acceptable, is considered approved. So they would allow it to be installed within City of Chicago limits in accordance with their building codes. These types of adoptions are duplicated around the country. many different jurisdictions. So if you went on a big trip around all the regulations, very similar. That's why the NRTL program is actually very important, and it's at the top of the list for approvals that you would need. That basically guarantees you most of the country. Now, what about on the Canadian side? Similar to the National Electrical Code, Canada has the Canadian Electrical Code. That's a CSA standard, so it was developed by the Canadian Standards Association. In numbering terms, we call it C22.1, and we will often call that Part 1 of the code. As I get to the standards section in a few slides, we'll refer off to what we call the Part 2. Those are all the product-specific standards, but everything starts with the Part 1. And within the Part 1, what we have is a very specific section that talks about the use of approved equipment. And as you'll see on screen, it's quite clear that equipment shall be approved by a certification organization accredited by the Standards Council of Canada. That's what I was mentioning. So as a jurisdiction, such as a province or a territory or a municipality, adopts the code, they actually bring that into law that the product shall be certified. And pretty much every electrical product needs to be. There are some exemptions. For example, low power product, they may not need to be certified, and there are specific exemptions in the code. But if you basically take the approach that pretty much everything needs to be done if it's electrically powered, then this will be your starting point for understanding where the legislation is. An example in Ontario, they enacted the Electrical Act, and they issued a regulation under it called the Electrical Safety Code. And within there, they adopted by reference the Canadian Electrical Code. You will notice it does say a specific date of the code, which in this case is 2018, but the code is on a 3-year cycle. The new one is actually being published, but due to government delays, as always, in adopting new rules, it does take time for it to get through. So we often find a lag between the new codes and the actual adoptions. The good news is there aren't usually that many changes, and if there are, then it takes time to bring them in, but the product-specific standards are always keeping up to date. So, irrespective of whether, let's say, Ontario or British Columbia had different adoptions, pretty much the same product standard will apply. So that's a good thing to bear in mind. So we talk about the regulations, but then, what is an NRTL? Well, Nemko is an NRTL. There are also a number of others as well. But ultimately what we're an independent organization, not affiliated with government. We are basically testing products, and then we're certifying them. And we also go and do inspections as well. This enables manufacturers to get their products assessed, conformity assessment against the requirements, and by a third party, so that gives the attestation to vendors, to regulators, that the product complies with rules. We have multiple sites. There are smaller NRTLs, there are larger ones, but they're all recognized in the same way. We have a scope of recognition. So if we determine that this one NRTL wants to have a specific type of standards, say for IT equipment, that's good. There are other NRTLs that may deal with plumbing equipment or both. So there are lots of different options. However, what we're doing today is just to give you an overview of the whole program to help you understand what you may have to do as you develop your products. Now, the standards that we're actually using, these are what we call appropriate standards in OSHA terms. And these are developed by standards development organizations using consensus methods. And then they will be issued by and under the authority of the American National Standards Institute, ANSI. That's where they become a national standard of America. In Canada, same thing. We'll have Canadian national standards. They're issued by the Standards Council of Canada, but developed by other organizations. Now, some of the key organizations, and you will have heard of them, I'm sure, we have UL, Underwriters Laboratories, and we have CSA, the Canadian Standards Association. Both of these organizations have been developing product standards for years. Many different types of product standards, electrical, plumbing, machinery, all sorts. So there's always been an assumption that if the standard was developed by them, then the product needs to be certified by them. That's not actually true, because the legal framework allows other agencies to be involved, such as Nemko, and there are others. All it says is that you have to be a recognized NRTL in the US or a accredited certification organization by the SEC. So you do not need to go to the standards developers to get those certifications. Very important because you need to know you have options. You're not tied to them, but we will use those standards, but you're not tied to those, say, organizations themselves. So what kind of typical standards are we talking about? Now, if we think of the IoT world, so everything's internet driven. So we're talking IT equipment. Yeah, that's true. And, you know, we've actually had a big change in the IT standards recently. And yeah, before I even go into numbers, I'll explain a little bit about these categories that I mentioned at the top of the table. Nemko has been part of what we call the CB scheme for many years. That's an international product safety certification scheme. And what they have done is enable countries from around the world to really come together to try and harmonize their processes as much as they can under international standards. And they came up with categories. So for example, the category ITAV means IT equipment and audio video. MEAS, test and measurement equipment. So what I've done is I've just carried those categories over, because we do use a lot of international standards in the North American standards development world. So yeah, to kind of keep a similar kind of nomenclature between the programs makes sense. But let's talk a little bit about the new standard ITAV. So the UL 62368, that is a relatively new standard, but what makes it like so important right now is that the predecessor was the UL 6950. That was for IT equipment. We had UL 60065. Well, they were merged together in what we call a hazard-based standard. So there was a lot more risk assessment into that particular standard, as opposed to the previous old approach, which was very, here's a requirement, does it meet this rule? Not as much risk assessment. There's been a lot of movement in the rest of the world, especially Europe on this one as well, where they put a drop dead date of actually 20th of December last year to phase out 6950 and 65. Everything must be 62368. So there's been a lot of activity in that field right now, especially, say, in the internet-driven world. There's a lot of IT devices, so there's been a lot going on to update their standards. Now, I mentioned about UL, CSA as being standards developers. Well, with medical devices in the US, that's actually a different agency. So we have AMI, Association Advancement of Medical Instrumentation. So they have actually developed those standards. So we've moved on from UL into the AMI standards. So we would find those if we were to be certifying a medical device. Now, of course, all of these products can have radios in them. So, so many things now are connected that you could be in multiple categories, to be honest. It could be household appliances, which is what the house stands for at the end. It could be medical, could be IT, could be test and measurement, could be all sorts. So, yeah, that's what's really exciting about our industry these days. You can't pigeonhole a particular type of interface or product into any one particular area. It's quite, quite exciting. So the good news here is that the Canadian developers are also pretty much harmonized with the US developers. So we have a lot of binational standards when we come to the IT/AV types, medical, test and measurement. Household is getting there in the appliance world. So these standards are being based on the international standards developed by the IEC. With national deviations, we have the National Electrical Code, we have the Canadian Electrical Code, and so we do have some differences in there. For historical reasons, our networks are different, but also language issues, for example. Canada is a bilingual country, and we have French and English. So any compliance with standards for Canada, if there are warnings, they would have to be in French and English. The US, they have some of their own national deviations as well, where it could be environmental. There are many, and these are all documented within the standards themselves. Now, one very important thing to consider with a standard is that it's voluntary. Now, you don't have to use a standard until it's been designated as a regulatory requirement. So because of this, we then have to consider, well, what versions of standards are we going to use? And regulators very often just say, look, use an appropriate standard. So that kind of leaves then the certification bodies like, okay, well, we have a few standards out there. What versions do we use? There are different ways that the certification bodies look at that particular situation. First and foremost, is it documented in the regulation what you have to use? OSHA do publish a list of appropriate standards. They don't give the dates on them. They just give the basic number. In Canada, the regulators don't issue dates of standards either. They make reference to the Canadian Electrical Code, which Annex A actually has a list of standards and gives dates. There is a consensus, however, that you go for the most recent, but that's not always feasible. So there are transitions that are often agreed between certification bodies. And as such, Nemko, like all the other certification bodies, the NRTLs, we coordinate. Yeah, we do make sure that we align wherever possible with any transitions, just to make it easier for the manufacturers to understand what the standard's going to be used, what are the drop-dead dates for getting updates, when will your certificate expire. So it's very important there is industry coordination, but there is also some guidance from the regulators as well via the codes. Key point though, unlike Europe, North America does allow what we call grandfathering. So if a standard does expire and there has been no specific hazards that have been identified which have to be corrected like immediately, then there is an option to continue using an older version of standard, providing that you continue with production surveillance. Yeah, that's actually very good for manufacturers. Europe, on the other hand, they actually specify withdrawal dates. And for example, in the low voltage directive, I mentioned about the IEC on EN 62368, where they actually had a withdrawal date, 20th of December, 2020. Everything off that was previously approved to 6950 was no longer approved and able to be sold. So they manufacturers had to update their technical files for the European market. North America, we allow people to continue providing that specified updates are either performed or production continues. So that is actually a very helpful process. Now, what is certification? At the end of all this, I'm talking about certification bodies and say testing labs. But what does it mean to be certified? Well, ultimately, when an NRTL certifies a product, it means that it's gone through a rigorous set of tests It's gone through an evaluation, technical experts in the field on that standard, and it's then gone for a decision within the certification body to basically decide, does it meet regulatory and product safety standard requirements? If it does, then a certificate will get issued. If it doesn't, of course, the manufacturer will get opportunities to address the findings, come back. It could be a retest. It could just be a documentation issue. It could be we need a new factory to be inspected. But ultimately, we look at all the requirements that are necessary. Then what happens is that particular certificate will get placed into what we call our directory. So our listing directory. And this, as you'll find for many of the agencies, Nemko is no different. We have a website link to our certified product lists. Hence, we call it listed. People can go there, especially the inspectors that are out in the field, the authorities having jurisdiction. They will see a product out in the field and say, oh, okay, we see a mark, we see a model number. We think it's this particular agency. They will go to their website, they will check the directory, and they will see if that product is listed. And if it is, that would be deemed acceptable. Now, when you've got a certificate, that doesn't necessarily mean that you can claim that the product's certified unless there is also the certification mark of that particular organization on the product. Nemko has a unique one. Other agencies have their own as well. The two must go hand in hand. You have a certificate and you have the marking. A product, honestly, is not considered certified unless that mark is on the product. The regulations state that it must have the mark. Now, to continue to apply the mark, then you have to undergo what we call production surveillance, factory inspections. We need to make sure that the ongoing production is in accordance with the original certificate. Are the components the same? Are the design processes the same? Is there independence between QA and the production? So there are all different types of things that we have to look at on an ongoing basis. That is all part of the certification process. So to summarize it, you have to have the product tested, you then have to get the certificate, you have to apply the mark, and you then have to undergo the surveillance. All of that together is a full certification. Now here's an example of Nemko's mark. So we have a unique mark, which is the N in a box. We have two identifiers, the 8 o'clock and 4 o'clock positions, C for Canada, US for the United States. And we've also got an indication of the standard that we use. In this case, 62368. So that indicates that it was ITAV equipment. And this mark will 99.9% of the time need to be on the product itself. If the product is not large enough to accommodate, we do have options. It could, for example, go on the packaging. So those would be assessed at the time of the evaluation. But just to get an example, that's how a mark would look. So let's talk a little bit about how we get you from the start to the finish. The start, you're in your design phase, you've got a concept. You're trying to think, all right, what do I need to do? I want to sell my product. That's what you're thinking. But there are lots of steps in between. Of course, you're going to have your internal developments. You've got your R&D engineers, you've got your component engineers, all working to actually build a prototype. What is so important at that point is that you've already identified what requirements you're going to be needing to actually meet. And part of that could be which standard, specifically for the country, of course, but if you're looking at additional countries outside for future rollout, have a think about that as well at the same time. Gives you an opportunity to address more at the same time. Now, you need to also understand where's the process at the test lab, at the certification body. What kind of documents are you going to use? Very important. How many samples are you going to have to provide for testing? Yeah, you might have lots and lots of transformers that are custom. You may want to use those as opposed to certified ones. Those would need to be tested also. So there are lots of different things that you have to consider. Now, I mentioned about components. North America is very, very strong on component approvals because of the production surveillance. And part of working within this is to identify, where possible, certified components. There are recognition programs from big agencies. UL is the most recognizable. And what that means is that they are putting the components through a production system as well, where they certify, and then ongoing production surveillance. This is great confidence for the certification bodies of the end product, knowing that those components are going to continue to meet the component standards. So where possible, as you're going through your design phase, look at what's available and look at what is certified to the North American rules. Now, as you go along, I suggest doing some pre-testing, of course. And if you get to the conformity assessment phase, which is basically testing and certification, and you haven't really applied any kind of debugging or kind of considerations of those requirements, there can be some very costly design changes required. So consider pre-testing at that point. You're also going to need to identify your production facilities. The earlier that you can go and qualify them, get them into your systems as suppliers, and then the earlier that your conformity assessment body knows about it, we can actually work with you to actually get them on our approved list, ready for the production phase. And of course, as I mentioned, you've got to get all of your service providers in place. Select your agency ahead of when the prototype's available, not as soon as it is, because the earlier that you have them in the process, the more communication there will be, the more confidence there will be, the smoother the process will go. So very important to take all these considerations into account. So what happens when your samples are ready and you're itching to market the product? There's still quite a bit to go. You still have lots of testing, and then we've got to get the certificate. There are lots of documentation requirements, so collate all of that, create your technical file. Take the guidance that you've gained from talking with your testing provider, get that together and submit that along with the samples that they've requested, and they will do the testing and they will do the evaluation against the standards. Get those factories inspected. If we can do the factory inspections at this point to get them into our system, you'll be able to sell much faster. Now, just to again be clear, we can only issue a certificate after everything has been completed. So test, evaluation, and inspection. If you went through some pre-testing, you were prepared with the documents, you're prepared with the production, the process goes a lot faster. Electrical safety projects can take a very long time. It could be months because there are so many different types of tests, especially if they're uncertified components. But it's important to also build that into your marketing plan. What is the period of time where it'll be going through conformity assessment? Things happen. Unfortunately, it does. But with preparation, with understanding of the process, it can be catered for. And then there's a lot less stress as you would try to get those products out to market. Now, at the back end, after the certificate's been issued, we have the production control. This is a very important ongoing activity. Our inspectors will come around to the factories and will take a minimum of 2 inspections per year. We'll inspect product, we'll inspect key quality processes, and we'll ensure that the production is in accordance with the original design of the product. Successful production control, of course, means the certificate is maintained. It's ongoing, means you can keep shipping the products. Issues, if they arise, can obviously put a bit of a wrench into that particular process. And that means shipments potentially could be held. which of course is money. So having all of this kind of under control really allows for a streamlined approach to getting the ongoing production in place and out to the market. And so you can really focus on your next product. And we'll go through the process again. So it's if you follow these simple steps, you'll be a lot better prepared. Very small slide here, but just to give you an idea of the types of documentation, if you have not been through the process before. But really it's the technical design documents that we're after. Of course, there are some administrative documents too, but ultimately we're after bills and materials. We're after PCB layouts, user manuals, labeling. It's all about just getting a documentation to support the construction of your product. That's how we evaluate things. That's how we can come back in the production control and verify that we have the same safe design that was originally approved. So there are a number. We provide checklists to our clients. They can basically collect those documents, submit them. The test labs will work with them as well in preparing them. So you're not left to your own devices, but there is help available should you need it. For those who have been through the process many times, this will be second nature. For those who have not been through it before, it can be a bit daunting. So take the guidance in the checklist, talk to your service provider, and this will make it a lot easier. Now, questions we often get, who can actually do the testing? So an NRTL has a test lab. It also has a certification element. But honestly, for various purposes, numbers of manufacturers like to test maybe locally. Maybe the agency you select for certification is not located near you. That does happen. So there are options. And especially us, I mean, as many other agencies can do as well, we can accept test data from different sources. There is actually an option to have the manufacturer themselves do the testing. We go through qualification process with the manufacturer and their laboratory, but it is absolutely permitted, providing, again, we have gone through that qualification. You could go to a third-party independent laboratory, again, providing that the certification body themselves has accepted the fact that we can get that data from that laboratory. We would do an audit and we will make sure they follow standard principles. We use ISO 17025 principles for test labs. If they can generate data in accordance with those principles and they've been qualified in our system, yes, we'll accept test data from them. We can also provide witness testing. We could go to a site where you need some very specialized equipment, or maybe it's just easier for you. It doesn't really matter. There is an option available. Another very interesting option, though, is the IECEE CB scheme. This was the international scheme I introduced earlier, and it allows an international approach to certification based on the IEC standards, which we have US and Canadian adoptions. If you went with an NRTL mark, US and Canada, you could also look to get what we call a CB certificate, a CB test report, which you could then take to other countries outside of North America. And that could give you access to even more markets. So if you got that, you can also come backwards, where you can come into the NRTL as opposed to just doing the NRTL mark and then CB. So definitely think about that. It's global market access. It's a whole subject in itself, but it's a very, very useful tool. Now, other regulatory considerations. The world we live in right now, everything is driven by wireless. We know that, hence the internet, Internet of Things. Everything's got to be portable. Everything's got to be connected. Electrical safety is just one element of regulatory consideration. What about energy efficiency? What about the radio part? What about some EMC or electromagnetic compatibility issues? You may even have some lasers and in your products. So all of these have different regulations. And these are just a few. I mean, there are others as well when we consider chemicals, when we consider waste recovery in Europe, for example. North America is very similar. We're moving towards more environmental considerations of regulation. So people need to bear in mind that there must be kind of reduction in mercury and lead and all that kind of stuff. So we've got to keep an eye on that too. But here's some examples. So let's say your product has a Wi-Fi or a Bluetooth transmitter in it. Well, you have to also get a certificate by a certification body recognized by the FCC, or in Canada by ISED, Innovation, Science, Economic Development. So yeah, that's one element you have to look at. Well, then what about it's a handheld device? You charge it from the mains. Well, of course, you've got to charge the battery somehow, but then it becomes subject to energy efficiency rules for battery charger systems. The US, you've got the Department of Energy rules. Canada, you've got Natural Resources Canada, both federal rules. But then there are also some local jurisdictions. Well, California, Canada, we have Ontario. They've got different kind of regulations. Luckily, the test methods are basically the same. Test once, get multiple approvals. But the fact is, you need to bear it in mind when you're developing your products. It's not just electrical safety. So again, talk to your conformity assessment body. Let's make sure that we can get you through. So I'm giving you all this information. The reason being, yes, Nemko is a certification body. It's a fact. We can point to our recognition as an NRTL. We can also point to our accreditation as Standards Council of Canada. We obviously do a lot more than just this as well. So I invite you to visit our website, contact our sales offices. We have a lot of experience in this. Nemko has been around 80 plus years in the world of testing and certification. As new products come along, we have expertise in many fields: radio, energy, electrical safety. So don't be shy. Please do reach out if there are questions on new products or questions on existing products. Yeah, we'll be more than willing to help. So thank you very much for listening, and I'll be more than happy to take some questions.
Thanks so much, Stuart. Great presentation, very informative. We do have a couple questions here. The first one we have is, for Canada, if we have component level third-party certifications from our suppliers, is a system level third-party certification needed on the end product?
Very good question. So thank you for that. So it really depends on what the components are. And there are many different levels of the product that we could look at. If we were, say, to look at a power supply, it could be an internal power supply that already has a component approval or a full certification itself, then you can embed that into the end product. What, as a certification body, we would do is we would take that certification at face value, and we wouldn't then go burying into that particular product to inspect it or whatever. However, when you integrate it into the end product, there could be some other angles that we have to look at. For example, has that power supply being installed within the conditions of its certification? If it has been, then that may reduce the amount of effort that we need to do on the end product. Other considerations as well could be you may have I/O ports on there, which also need evaluation. So ultimately, when the jurisdiction, or the authority having jurisdiction comes along, they want to understand, is that product certified? They look at the end product. Having component approvals means you reduce the effort to get there. But yes, you will still need an end product approval, but the effort is significantly reduced. And yeah, we strongly encourage to continue to get those components selected with the approvals that on those components, and that will make your life so much easier.
Perfect. Thank you, Stuart. One question that we've had from a couple people is, are you comfortable with sharing this presentation with me, and that way I can share it out broadly afterwards?
Yes, and as far as I'm concerned, we're in a public environment right now. So yes, of course, we'd be more than happy.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Stuart. A question here from Jason. What are some differences between NRTLs?
Okay, so an NRTL itself, for example, Nemko is one, UL is one, Intertech is one. We're all the same when you look at the base requirements. We're all recognized by OSHA. We're all gone through the same auditing. We've all gone through the same rigor that those regulators need to go through. The differences really then come on how you work with them. Nemko has its, we're a global organization, and that's a fact. There are many different services that Nemko can offer versus potentially another agency. So, our perspective on it is the mark is the same. If you have a Nemko mark, it means the same as a UL mark or an Intertech mark. What really then drives it is what added value do you feel as a manufacturer you get from working with one agency over another. And that really comes by the people that you work with, the relationships that you get, and also the additional accreditations that you can maybe leverage at the same time. So to basically level it out, we're all the same when it comes to the formalities. Are we the same when it comes to the added values? No, we're all different. We have our own kind of management systems. We have our own employees. So it's really, what do you feel comfortable with? What do you perceive as value in your particular situation?
That's really helpful. Thanks, Stuart. Next question here. If we already have a listing with another agency, is it possible to move it to another agency without retesting?
Thank you. It's a good question. So the answer is yes, it is possible. There are a number of different elements of the process. The first one, and as you say, we've got a listing already, then what we would need to do, if you were looking to transfer that to Nemko, for example, we would verify the listing, and we would do an inspection of the sample, and we would get a copy of the listing report that you have. And this is really to build our own internal file, just to basically say, okay, this is what the product is, this is our documentation. We'll have a look at the factory surveillance history, make sure that there haven't been any critical issues that have been raised in production. And then what we can do is do an administrative transfer after we've basically verified by looking at the sample, looking at the factory history. And then you will enter the ongoing production surveillance with Nemko for ongoing certification. So providing that the product that we see doesn't have any real deviations from what the listing report says, there would be no need to do any retest at that point. If there were some updates that you wanted to do, you want to change some critical components, you want to change design of the wiring boards or something, then of course we can accommodate that too. But that probably would require a bit more retest and evaluation. But if it was a straight transfer, it's actually pretty straightforward.
Thank you, Stuart. Another question here from Val. How often is Nemko doing factory inspections per year for NRTL certified products?
Okay. Thank you for the question. Yeah, so the NRTL policy itself, which is issued by OSHA, does speak to 4 inspections per year. However, under circumstances, you can go with 2. And some of those circumstances really are about confidence in the production system. Has the factory been under surveillance with other agencies? Have they got a certified quality system, ISO 9001, for example? All of these can feed in to making a decision to bring it automatically to 2 per year. We must never go below 2, but I know that many agencies standardize on 4. We kind of look at it the other way, so we want to make sure that we work with production facilities and manufacturers that are looking to basically issue quality product, follow the processes, and that gives us confidence. It gives you confidence that we will work with you. So we target 2, providing the evidence is there, and that can be based in the same quality system registration history with other agencies. So we are more than open to 2, but it could be more if there were problems. But we would prefer to look on the bright side.
Thanks, Stuart. Another question here. You had mentioned in the presentation that there is a minimum number of inspections of 2, yet we have heard that 4 is the normal. What allows us to have 2 as opposed to 4?
Yeah. So actually, there was a couple of comments just on a previous answer on that. So the key thing is really, if you have defined documented quality processes within the production system, ISO 9001, even though it's not mandatory to have a certificate to that, it sure helps. But the quality system certainly has to be documented. That is one very good input to making that decision for 2. And as I mentioned, if there was surveillance with other agencies as well, it doesn't have to be an NRTL. It could be for some other certification program around the world. Again, that gives us confidence that production processes are being followed, and ultimately we're not seeing bad product or unsafe product being actually released from the factories. So many different elements, put it together, and that's where the decisions can be made.
Thanks, Stuart. Kind of a follow-up to that. Monica's asking, if she has one product with several brands, how would that be handled?
Okay, so that's also a very good question, which gets asked quite a bit, actually. So there are a couple of different ways you can handle it. First of all, you could have all of the brands within one certificate. So you have multiple different brand names or trademarks. Another way of doing it is via what we call multiple listing. That's where each of the brand owners can have their own certificate, which they can wave out in the marketplace. And basically it's not evidencing that it's tied to anything or any other certification. So it's an independent certificate. Behind the scenes, what we do is we link them, so that if there is a engineering change in the main product that it was branded from, then we can trace that through to all of the different multiple listees or the different brand owners. So when we handle this, we would basically recommend the multiple listing application. It's a paperwork exercise, and that way, as long as we get authorization from the original manufacturer and for the potential new brand owner, we link the 2 together, and it's a very, very quick administrative process. So we have a very well-defined kind of scheme for that, and we'd be happy to work with that.
Awesome. Thank you, Stuart. Another question here. UL inspections seem to be more intrusive in the manufacturing supply chain and even at the recognized component level. CSA inspects at the top level. How does Nemko approach this?
I wouldn't really want to comment too much on what one agency does versus another one. I think the key from our side is what is necessary to meet the rules. And from our perspective, there are different elements within the directives that we have to follow. The first being, we want to make sure that we have confidence that there is a documented production process. We have a management system. We are also required to look at product. And so our inspectors will go in and they will request to see a product opened up on the bench. They'll pick it off the line, and they will do a sample check of the components against the description reports. So those are the official certification documents. And as a result of that, they will basically have a very good feeling very quickly, usually within a couple of hours, as to how things are going. They'll look at key records. How's the incoming inspection? How many products have you had returned? So, you know, there are key requirements to follow, but we also recognize that we're not there to stop production. We're there to make sure that production is ongoing so you can get your product out, and we want to just be a part of the process and not somebody who is standing in the way of it. So I would hope that experience from manufacturers who are using us would confirm that, you know, it's not our intent to be obtrusive. We are there to do a job, but we are also there to ensure safe product as well. And, you know, working with the manufacturers, getting the relationship is so important, because it is a confidence issue as much as, you know, going in and just looking at the product as well. So it's a sampling exercise. We can't do everything. That's what audits are, the sampling. So, so I would hope that people would see us as not being a pain. You know, we would hope that we are seen as a partner. So I can't comment really more on other agencies, and it's really up to how people perceive us.
Thank you, Stuart. We just have a couple minutes left, so I did want to open the floor. If anyone has any last questions, feel free to put those in the chat box or unmute yourself. Again, just as a reminder, this was recorded, so you'll be able to find that presentation on the right YouTube channel on the meetup page, and Stuart has graciously agreed to share his slides. I do encourage you to reach out to Stuart directly if you have any additional questions that you think of after this presentation. His contact information is on that slide right there. So again, thank you so much for your time, Stuart. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And thank you all for being here today.
Thank you very much, Caroline. Thank you, everybody, for attending. And again, please feel free to reach out.
Leave it for just 1 minute to see, but a lot of people are just saying thanks in the chat box to you, Stuart. It was a great presentation.
Thanks.
All right, everyone. We'll call it a day then. Take care. Thanks, Stuart.
Thank you. Bye now.
Bye.